My name is Irene Oldfather. I'm Director of Engagement and Strategic Partnerships at the Health and Social Care Alliance. Can I introduce to you, we've got Leslie and Louise, who are our BSL and English interpreter, sign language support today. And then we've got Claire Mills, who's capturing today's conversation via illustration, and we've had some great experiences before with Claire, and we always see the outputs as being very, very significant in terms of our conversations. So Claire, thanks so much for joining us today, and I'm waving back at you. So welcome to everyone. And this is the third actually in our series on menopause, and as you'll know, the Women's Health Plan was published by Scottish Government last year, and it aims to reduce women's inequalities through 66 actions, and effective menopausal support is one of those actions. And we're really delighted that this is the third menopausal information session in our series, and they are always so well attended, so it's good to know that there is an opportunity to bring women together and to share topics that are so important to them. And I think webinars like today are a great part of involving people in conversations, and we know that about 400,000 women in Scotland are of menopausal age, and we reckon that's kind of between 45 and 54, but as you know, if you've joined our sessions before, it can extend before and beyond that. But one of the areas of menopausal symptoms and physical change that comes, that's different for every person, but that often people's sex lives, their body confidence is affected, and that was really why we thought it was important to explore this area. And today we're joined by Dr Claire Macaulay. Claire is a menopause and sexual wellbeing expert, and she's going to give us some insights today into some of these areas. And we've had a little change of plan, because today was really going to be a conversation between Claire and Yvonne Kerr from NHS Lothian, but unfortunately Yvonne is ill and can't make it today. So Jen, who's I think on the screen as well, and she's our Women's Health Officer, will kind of identify, and there she's waving, Jen will kind of identify some of the talking points that we know women would like to hear about. And kind of we'll hear from Claire about some of these areas and others. So I'm going to hand over now to Jen and Claire for the rest of today, and I hope you find out a lot of information from today's session, and please keep us posted. We'll be watching the chat function and capturing all of that and all of your comments from this morning. So thank you so much for joining us, and over to Claire and Jen.
Thanks, Irene. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming along today. It's great to see so many people on the call. I'm Jen Stewart. I'm Senior Development Officer at the Alliance, and I work within our women's health programme of work, where we're supporting the Scottish Government's Women's Health Plan. So, as Irene said, we're very pleased to be joined by Dr Claire Macaulay today. So, Claire, thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm great, thanks, Jen. I'm really excited to be here, and just want to acknowledge that you've ended up in the hot seat by mistake.
I know.
You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job.
I know, you're lumped with me, sorry. So Claire, you're an oncology doctor, but you also are a qualified sexual wellbeing expert with a particular interest in menopause. So just to kick us off, Claire, tell us a wee bit about yourself and I suppose the work that you do.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jen. I'm really delighted to be here, and just really acknowledging how great it feels actually to be talking about sex under the auspices of the Scottish Government and the Alliance, and actually we're having these conversations publicly and clearly and out there, and with a real understanding that this is important to people. It's really important. So I really just want to acknowledge how grateful I feel to be here, to be able to having these kind of conversations in this kind of setting. So a little bit about me. I'm a breast cancer oncology doctor, so I treat people with breast cancer. And as a consequence of that, for treatment for many people with breast cancer, we might make them deliberately menopausal. For some women, we might give them a second menopause because some of the drugs that we use. And for some people, they may get into a menopause much earlier than they might have done if they've got a hormone-sensitive breast cancer, because we're deliberately manipulating their hormones in terms of their breast cancer, and that makes them menopausal. And what I began to realise was that we were putting people in this situation of menopause, and we weren't really necessarily talking about it. And what we definitely weren't talking about was the consequences on their sex life. And the other things that I'm interested in, I'm also interested, I'm a somatic sex coach, which means using the opportunity for people to create the sex lives that they want. And I began to realise that there was some kind of synergy across these two things. People were having this experience where their sex lives were being affected. We weren't talking about it. And even if we were talking about it, we didn't really know, we didn't really have options in terms of offering people about what they might do about it. And then it became really apparent to me that actually there was some really basic stuff that if people knew might actually make a massive difference to their lives. And that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing, this kind of mashup. It was a kind of unholy matrimony of all the things I love: coaching, medicine, sex, and menopause, and it all came together in this unholy alliance that I call the pleasure possibility, which is a space for people to come who are having these kind of difficulties in their sex lives and their personal lives, to come and talk about it in relation to other people who are having similar experiences, with some specialist input as to how you can make some of that a little bit better. So that's where I'm coming at it from.
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of those points around, you know, what can we do, and some of those kind of basic steps that you're speaking about there, you know, we'll get into that in the course of this conversation. But I think just kind of as a general starter, Claire, you know, what's happening at menopause and that kind of period of menopausal transition that causes changes, you know, to people's sex life or to people's bodies, that then causes changes to people's sex lives. You know, what are the kind of common things that you have conversations about?
I think what's really important to understand is that it's brilliant that there's a lot of chat now around the menopause and actually understanding the nuts and bolts of what's going on. And what I really would like to focus on today is having an understanding of what's the nuts and bolts of what's going on in your pants, because people are experiencing things. And when people come to see me as clients, they kind of think that they're the only one, or they think that what they're imagining is happening can't really be happening. And I'm saying, no, that really is what's happening to you. So maybe this would be a good point for me to introduce Verity. Anyone who's ever seen me talk knows that I don't go anywhere without my vulva. This is Verity, the velvet vulva, and we're going to use her today to give some indications about what actually is going on in your pants. So if we think about the menopause in general, so most people are beginning to have an understanding that it's a change in their hormones in some way. And in the main, the thing that gives us the symptoms, and that could be the symptoms that we know of, like hot sweats, nights, insomnia, sore joints, all of those kind of things, are because our ovaries are reducing the amount of estrogen that they produce with age. And that's really the sum total of basically what's happening. There are other things going on as well, but in general terms, we're talking about a lack of estrogen. All of the cells in our body have receptors for estrogen, and we can experience declining levels of estrogen in lots of different aspects of our body, but the most sensitive areas of our body are the things that are in our pants. So if we look here, if you imagine that these are the outer labia, which are normally covered with hair. These are the inner labia here. Look, she's a puppet, actually, she moves, so she's my favourite thing ever. The inner labia here, and then we have what's called the clitoral hood, and underneath that, the glands of the clitoris, so that's the parts of the clitoris that we can see. And then there's the vaginal vault itself, with what people call the G-spot, which isn't actually a real spot, but it's inside the vagina here. And then between the clitoris and the vagina, represented by this rose here, that's the urethra. That's where we pee out of. We don't pee out of our vagina, if anybody's under the illusion that they might be. The amazing, actually, how little anatomy people really know about what's going on in their pants. But in general terms, all of these tissues and the things that sit behind them, so the muscles of the pelvic floor, the bladder, all of the other things that sit behind here, all of these tissues are hugely sensitive to estrogen. So when we get to the menopause and the estrogen levels start to fall, these incredibly sensitive tissues don't work the way that they did before. They can start to die off in a process that's called atrophy. So people may have heard of something that's called vaginal atrophy, and that basically means dying off of tissues. It is actually happening. So people will come to me and they'll say, I'm not able to orgasm, my clitoris is definitely smaller, or my lips don't feel the same. That is actually happening. If you are sitting going, this is me, it's actually happened to you. You're not making it up, you're not imagining it, it is actually happening. And it's because these tissues are so reliant on estrogen to do their job properly. And what that means is if these tissues are not working optimally the way they would normally, it can be very painful and it can be very dry. And also you can start to lose sensation. So all of the things in here are sensitive to estrogen. And if you're having other symptoms such as night sweats or hot flushes or brain fog or joint pain or all of those things, and you're having things in your pants, the things in your pants are all part and parcel of the same thing. And often because we're very unfamiliar ourselves with these parts of our anatomy, we don't make the link between the two. And if I tell you that my own first kind of perimenopausal experience was actually I had problems with my contact lenses. So all of our tissues can dry up. People talk about you drying up and closing over and all that kind of thing. But actually it was my eyes, but I also had vaginal dryness at the same time. And I didn't even twig in the beginning that that's what's going on. And I teach people this stuff. So it's not like it will simply happen for you overnight. It's a process. And what I often see is women will come and they'll say, I've treated myself for thrush 3 times, because some of the symptoms feel quite similar. If you are of a certain age, if you are somewhere between 40 and 55 and you think you're treating yourself for persistent thrush and it's not getting better with the treatment for thrush it would normally do, it may well be that you have the early signs of vulvovaginal atrophy, or the proper term that we use is the genitourinary syndrome of menopause, because that covers the genitals and our urinary symptom, and we'll talk a wee bit about incontinence as we go on. But in terms of what's happening, that's what's happening, and it's really happening. I think that's the thing I would really like people to take away, is it's actually happening. You're not making it up, you're not going crazy, it's not daft. Oh, there's a few people saying they've had problems with their contact lenses. It's all the same process, usually, in my experience. It might be something else, there might be something else going on for you, but in my experience, the issues I had up here were the same as issues I was having down there. I didn't necessarily twig or put them together all at once. And then I chose to start HRT, which we can talk about. Some people will and some people will not, and that's absolutely an important choice. But actually, when I started HRT, the eye problem went away, and I didn't even twig. So it's about understanding that, you know, something's not coming along with a big red flag saying, I'm a symptom of menopause. It's just about allowing people to have the knowledge and understanding that these are the things that they're looking out for. So it's happening. It's definitely happening. If you're saying, gosh, it's taking me longer to reach orgasm than it did before, it probably is. If you're saying it just doesn't feel quite right down there, it probably is. If it feels a bit nippy and sore, it probably is. And if you're of a particular age and you might be having other symptoms, it is likely that it's got something to do with the menopause.
Thank you for that, Claire. There's a few light bulb moments in the chat around the contact lenses and the dry eyes, I think, and also very rude of me not to have introduced Verity at the start of the session, so it's lovely to have her with us. So, you know, you mentioned there dryness and discomfort, and, you know, vaginal dryness and discomfort, that's going to have a huge impact, I imagine, on sexual well-being. So what would you recommend, you know, what can people do if that vaginal dryness is really making sex painful and it's impacting the relationships? What can people do?
So I think it can often be multifaceted. There can be more than one thing on. If your sex life is great otherwise and you've got pain, that's one thing. But in my experience, what happens is the pain comes along with lots of other things around desire and libido that we'll talk about as well. But in terms of, if we just talk about dryness, it is probably and pain, it's probably one of the most treatable menopausal symptoms. And there's 3 different facets of thinking about how you're going to manage it. The first is lubrication. So let's start with lube. Lube on everything. Everybody who knows me knows that a big part of what we talk about, and this is not actually just for people who are experiencing vaginal dryness because of the menopause, it's for people who are experiencing vaginal dryness for any reason, for people we're societally conditioned to think that instantly somebody shows any sexual interest in us, we should lubricate like the Niagara Falls. And actually for many people that's not the case, and lubrication is a game changer for anyone who's having sex. So just to put that out there, actually I'm a huge proponent and fan of lube, and it can be particularly important at this kind of menopausal time, because if you are having pain and discomfort when you're having sex, why would you want to have sex? Frankly, it's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant, it's not pleasurable. And generally what I find is people who are engaging in sex like that with their partner are doing it from a sense of duty, not from a sense of them getting anything out of it. It's for someone else. And that's quite a common theme in life for many of us, that actually we're doing and living a lot of our lives for someone else, particularly if you're a midlife woman and you work and maybe you've got kids, maybe you have a partner, maybe you've got aging parents. Your whole life is geared around creating for other people. And this is just another chore on the things on the to-do list. I don't think that's good enough, frankly. I think we deserve much better than that. So if pain is a problem, lube is an absolute game changer, number one. You may have all sorts of feelings about lube, and that's a whole other thing. And generally when I'm working with people, we have to start right back with what are their feelings and thoughts and beliefs about things that were probably given to them when they were children, when they were early teenagers, when they were going through puberty, that they've carried through their whole life to this point. And they may have all sorts of feelings about lube, you know, I shouldn't need to use lube and all of that stuff. And, you know, we need to unpack all of how you got there, because that didn't just arrive with the menopause. But lube is the first thing. And engaging your partner, if it's partnered sex that you're engaging with, in a way that makes that fun. So that's, you know, that's the first one. The second one is non-hormonal methods of achieving vaginal moisturization. And you can get specific vaginal moisturizers. You can get them on prescription and you can buy them over the counter. And basically what they do is you use them once or twice a week, and they're designed to help the moisture stay in the mucous membranes of the vaginal wall itself. So you insert it, it's like a gel, it's like a moisturizer, and it helps the tissues to stay plump and moist. And they don't contain any hormones, and lots of people find them really helpful. However, if we move from non-hormonal methods, so that's the lubes and the moisturizers, the thing that will actually treat the problem being the lack of estrogen, is to use local vaginal estrogens in the vagina itself. Now, what that means is they look like little tablet pessaries, they're little small tablets that you insert into the vagina, for usually daily for a number of days when you begin. And then you might only need to use it twice a week. So they come in pessaries, and they also come in a cream that you can rub on the vulva and the clitoris and around about, which can help. And for most people, a combination of both those things is usually the best way forward. And what that is doing is that's providing the estrogen that we've lost locally, simply to these tissues that you're using it on. So you're rubbing it on the lips and the outer lips, possibly you may be using it inside the vagina itself and over the clitoris. Now, what we know is that the absorption into the rest of your body of that estrogen is very, very low. If you were going to use vaginal estrogen preparations for a whole year, the equivalent amount that the rest of your body gets is the same as one HRT tablet. So there is very, very limited absorption of the estrogen into the rest of your body. And what that means is, if you are someone who's been told you can't have HRT, now there's a whole question about why you might have been told that, and that may or may not be true, but even if that were the case, if you were told somebody who couldn't have full HRT for the rest of you, so that's patches or gels or tablets that you take orally, you should also anyway, even if that were the case, be able to use vaginal estrogens should you want. And there's a couple of really important parts to know about that, which is this atrophy problem. So when things start to dry up and they're not working as well, many symptoms of the menopause will get better with time. So the night sweats will go away, the flushes will go away, you'll be back to sleeping better, joint pains will go away with time. The problems in your pants are not going away. They're not going to get better. If anything, they're going to get worse with time. So if you're going to choose to try hormonal estrogens locally in the vagina, then you're probably going to use that for as long as you want your vagina to be functional. So that might be forever if that's what you want. But understanding that it's not something that you have a course of treatment of and it's better and you stop, because the same problem will just happen again. If you're somebody who's predisposed to having these issues, then they're going to happen again when you stop them. And that's important for you to know. If your GP, for example, might say, okay, well, I'll give you it for 3 months. Because actually you were in the process of making sure that GPs and other doctors are aware of all of these issues as well. So you need to be able to stick up for yourself and say, well, actually, my understanding was that, I would need to stay on this as long as I wanted. And that's the truth of it. If you wanted that problem not to recur, then you need to keep adding the estrogen that you would be using before. So they are hugely effective. Like massively effective, life-changing for some of the people who come to see me as clients. Maybe they come as a couple because they want to do some sex therapy work, or they come individually. In fact, I just saw a couple who I had helped some months ago whose life has just been revolutionized, because it wasn't that they didn't want to have sex, it's just that the whole thing had become so fraught and painful, and all of the emotional things that come with that, and actually some vaginal estrogen fixed the whole thing. So it's really, really important to understand it doesn't get better on its own. It will come back if you stop treatment, but the treatment is usually extremely effective. And, to add to that, If you're somebody who's using full HRT, so let's say you're using patches or taking tablets or using gel, we know that even 1 in 4 people who are using full HRT will still have vaginal problems. So you might need vaginal estrogens on top of the HRT you're already on, if that's what you've chosen. So it's really important to understand that you can have it on its own if you choose not to take HRT and you want some other way of managing your other menopausal symptoms, or if your vaginal symptoms are actually the most difficult thing about the menopause, and if you had that dealt with, the rest of it you could cope with. So you can either have it on its own, just the vaginal estrogen on its own if that's what you choose, or you can have it alongside full HRT if that's your choice. And if you don't want anything hormonal at all, then the long-acting vaginal moisturizers can be helpful, but they're not going to deal with the underlying fact that the tissues are dying off, but they can be really helpful also. So different things for different people, depending on what they want to experience and what they're happy to put in their body.
Well, thanks for that, Claire. I think it's really useful for people to know that there are options, and probably quite relieving as well, and that these options can be flexible, and that, you know, things that are causing discomfort, that it can be, you know, it can get better. But one of the things that you mentioned there as well is that, you know, oftentimes when people are at menopausal age, there's lots happening in people's lives, right? And we'll be having really busy lives, and often that can impact, you know, whether or not you want to have sex, your libido, but also when you add on top of that menopausal symptoms, that libido is really affected. So I suppose, you know, libido can change, you know, throughout a person's life, but what can people do if they're really struggling with, you know, desire to have sex at a menopausal age? What would you recommend?
So I think, again, a lot of this is about understanding, actually, and about knowing some basic things that usually when I tell people some of these things, it's usually relieving because they just didn't know. So actually sometimes what the thing to do is actually to get some information, which hopefully you'll get from this today, and then we can think about it. So there's 2 aspects to that, but let's deal with the life is busy piece first of all. So we have a specific circuitry in our brain that works on sexual excitation. So as feeling aroused, feeling all the things that happen, the thoughts that happen in our head to the things that happen in our body. And it's called the sexual excitation system. And we also have a brake system. So we have an inhibitory system, which means that's why we don't go and take all our clothes off in Tesco's, for example. So we've got 2 systems, accelerators and brakes. And the accelerator system that we have, and all of that system in relation to our libido and our wish and our arousal status, is completely overshadowed by our stress systems. So our body cannot do stress, so fight and flight, that kind of chronic fight and flight reaction that we understand, that sympathetic nervous system activation from being overbusy, from being tired, all of those things. Our body is always going to choose to run the stress cycle, because that's the one that's going to keep us alive. That's what it's for. It's for running from lions and tigers, for example. It will always choose that system over our sexual arousal system, because that's not something that's necessarily going to keep us alive. So if we have a lot of stress in our lives, the other part of our brain simply cannot do the bit. It cannot get us up to the line. And then you've got a whole load of menopausal symptoms on top, and. But to understand that for many people, the most useful thing that they could do from a libido point of view is to address their stress. And, you know, at this point in life, many people do have extremely stressful lives. Could be teenagers, could be job. You know, you might be in a position where you're in the most stressful job you've ever been in, for example. Partner issues, family issues, parent issues, all of that kind of stuff. So recognizing that what's going on in the rest of your life is impacting on your ability to feel like a sexual being. And that's just the way it is. And often people want to come to, so for example, there's a whole issue around testosterone. So I have in the group that I run, people will come in and say, I've had testosterone, I've taken it for 6 months, it's made no difference. Well, actually, your life's a disaster. No amount of rubbing on a little bit of testosterone is actually going to deal with some of the things that are keeping you away from being a sexual being and being within your body and having all those experiences. So stress is a big thing. Managing stress, recognizing that you're under stress, and choosing to prioritize something else, because sex is not unique in any aspect of our life. If we don't prioritize it, it isn't going to happen. And the second aspect of the stress thing that feeds into this is also what we understand or have been told or taught or societally conditioned to think about in terms of sex drive and libido isn't actually relevant for the vast majority of people in female bodies. So there are 2 types of desire, as we call it. One is called spontaneous desire, which is what it says is out of the blue, you have this feeling that comes up over you, often, quite often body up, if you like, that you just feel horny and you want to have sex. Now, what we know is for the vast majority of people in female bodies, that's not how we experience desire at all. But if you look at all of the things that we see in society about how we should experience sexual desire, they're the messages that we get. Now, it might not be a surprise to you to know that when we research male-bodied people, that is how they experience desire the majority of the time. So this idea that you should be standing at the washing up bowl with your marigolds on and suddenly spontaneously out of the blue feel horny just simply isn't true for the vast majority of us. And it's less true when we start to get to the menopausal stage and the estrogen, which is part and parcel of what's driving our desire sometimes, is beginning to dwindle. Now, what we do have is a thing called responsive desire. So if we look at the flip side of that, which is when sexy things have started to happen, then I'm starting to feel something, I'm starting to feel aroused. And what very many people will say to me is, oh, I really can't be bothered, but see when we get going, it's great. And then we get saying, oh, why don't we do that more often? That is responsive desire. Now, why is that important? It's important because if you are waiting for a bolt of desire to the fanny, it's not coming. It wasn't coming before, and it's not coming now. It's definitely not coming now. It's certainly not if you didn't experience it before. And the reason that that's important is because if that's what you're waiting for, if that's what you're expecting because of the messages that you've got, because of the internal beliefs you've got about what desire should look like, and it doesn't come, then you think you're broken. You think there's something wrong with you. And if we can just simply know that if you put your body in the bed and you prioritize it and you make time for it, you will probably enjoy it because you have responsive desire. And that's normal. It's normal for the vast majority of people in female bodies. And we all know that to some extent. If you think about it, oh yeah, actually I've had that situation where I really couldn't be bothered and it felt like duty sex, but actually when I got going, I really enjoyed it. And that's what responsive desire is. And you're not broken. If you experience responsive desire, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. That is absolutely normal. And that's the one biggest question that people come to me with is, am I normal? Yes, I'm absolutely certain that the vast majority of people having difficulties in their sexuality are absolutely normal and you're not broken. And if we understand, okay, actually I've got responsive desire, what do I want to do with that then? Then you need to recognize that if you want to have a sexual relationship, then there is some effort involved in that. There's some showing up and wanting it and being clear that that's what you want for yourself, not necessarily with a partner, but being clear yourself that you want to prioritize this. Then when you put your body in the bed, then you will find that things will start to happen. And that's really, really important in terms of we are waiting to experience desire from the outside. We're somehow waiting for it to come, but actually it's in you. You just need to choose. And that's a challenge for everyone who's listening. What if you went away and decided, okay, actually, yeah, this is important to me, and I'm going to put my body in my bed and I'm going to see what happens, whether that's with yourself, whether that's with a partner, but actually what would happen if you were going to choose and prioritize what it is that you wanted? And I think you'll be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying there is that you really need to have a conversation with yourself, don't you? But I suppose attached to that, I imagine for many people, because of that different desire systems that you spoke about, there is a need for some to have a conversation with a partner, isn't there, as well? So you know, what's the best way of doing that? Because I think this area for many people, and you spoke there about, you know, am I normal? These worries and anxieties and embarrassment, in a way, it's so linked sometimes to how we're socialized to as kind of women and girls or whatnot to experience our bodies. So how do we have kind of these positive, you know, judgmental, lack of judgment conversations with our partners around it? And
also just acknowledging, you know, some of the chat comments there about, yeah, I do feel broken and I do feel undesirable and I feel like my body is the enemy. And actually, when I work with people, a lot of what we've got to do is reprogram a lot of that. Your body is your beautiful, whatever you want to call it, God pod, it's your vehicle to move through life, whatever it is that you choose to think of it. And what I see is exactly what somebody's just described in the chat there, is we've now got into this, I am a thing up here that wants a thing, and somehow I'm devoid from my body who's doing something completely different. And actually what we really often have to do is try to bring those two things back together. And when we dig into a lot of that, sometimes that's been going on for a really long time. It might be about our body confidence, or how, you know, our body image, or what we think about our body, or our weight, or whatever else it is. So there's so many things Yeah, and people saying you lose so much confidence. And I suppose what I see is the vast majority of that original confidence is something that's coming from the outside. And what I'm saying is what we want to build at this point in our lives is something from the inside. It's about the internal work of knowing that you are who you are, that you want what you want, that you know how to get it, that you deserve it. All of those kind of things are the things that often I'm actually working with, which are before we even get to the nuts and bolts of what the sex might look like. And that part, once we've done that work, the how do you share that with a partner? So as you said, Jen, it's about, you need to get really real with what's in here first. And often I will say to people, what is it that you want? And they don't know what they want. It's never occurred to them to think about what they want in many aspects of their lives, and certainly not in their sex life. It's something that they've just done often for someone else. And if we don't get really real about what it is that we want and are prepared to own that this is what we want, then you're not going to get it. Nobody else is coming. Nobody is bringing it to you. It's about doing some of the internal work about what do I want. And we'll maybe do a little piece, Jen, we'll maybe do a little embodied piece to give people a sense of what that might be. And we'll do that towards the end. But I think before you can talk to a partner, you really need to know what it is that you want. So let's assume that you've started to figure out what it is that you want. Your partner already knows. Frankly, you think you're hiding it, you think you're having sex that is meaningful for both of you. At some level, usually partners will have some sense of what's going on. And the other thing that partners often say to me is if this is news to them, that that their partner's having pain, for example, they are horrified to think that they've been having sex with their partner that they were unaware was painful for them. And that's not where the vast majority of partners want to be. The vast majority of partners want to be supportive and alongside and all this, but they cannot possibly do that if we don't tell them. And so having that discussion with your partner might start with, yeah, somebody said something, a really important part will come. I'll just get a wee comment there, Jen, we'll come back to that in a minute. Your partners do not want to be having sex with you that you don't want to have. You might think that you're doing something out of a sense of duty, which is often what we see in all that. When I start to unpick that with people, they're doing that in all aspects of their lives, not just here. That's just a flavour of things that they're doing over here, doing things for other people that they think other people want because they should be expectations and all of that stuff. And it just plays out in the bedroom in exactly the same way. But if your partner doesn't know, they can't possibly support or help you. And that can feel like a really scary conversation to have, particularly if you have been tolerating sex that's painful. How do you then go to somebody and say, yeah, actually, it's been painful for the last 18 months and everybody's horrified and upset? But if you don't have the conversation, you're going to continue to have the sex that you're having. So there's something about choosing the level of discomfort. Do you want to choose the level of discomfort of having sex that's really painful forever, or do you want to choose the level of discomfort of being honest? And, you know, there are different types of discomfort, but I would suggest that one of them has a better long-term outcome in terms of you getting what you want. So there's something around being honest with a partner once you've started to be honest with yourself about what you want, and then allowing them to come on the journey a little bit, you know, looking at different things, trying different things, being open about what's going on for you. And that can feel quite scary. And often what I'm doing with, you know, with clients that come to me is to step-by-step walk them through that process, particularly if they have been tolerating for a long time and they know their partner's going to be upset. But most partners, in my experience, want to be having sex with you that you want to be having. So there's usually a win-win, and at some level they will probably know. And often it can be very relieving for people. And if coming back to that comment that said, you know, I'm worried about committing to sex and then not being able to fulfill. Now, again, there's a whole piece there around what is sex. So for the vast majority of people, it's not real sex unless it involves a penis and a vagina. Unless it involves somebody sticking something in somebody else, it isn't full sex. So I would say, speak to the lesbians, they'll tell you a thing or two about having sex, and there's sometimes no sticking anything anywhere. But we have this societally conditioned idea that it's not full sex unless it's penetration. And I think that's absolute nonsense. You know, your sex life can look however you want it to look. And what I suggest to people, particularly if they're starting to work with a partner towards somewhere they want to go, is take the idea of sex out of it altogether and focus on pleasure. What feels good in your body. That might mean earlobes, it might mean the inside of your elbow, it might mean all sorts of different things, but actually what would it be like to become pleasure explorers together? What would it be like to go on a journey, an adventure of actually what pleasure is this amazing body capable of? And it will be capable of far more things than you can currently imagine. And you might end up with a much, much better sex life overall, even in the sex life you were having in your 30s, because you're coming at it from a completely different angle. What feels good in my body right now? And if that doesn't include penetration right now, then it doesn't include penetration right now. That doesn't mean you can't have a lovely, intimate, connected experience with a partner that doesn't even involve penetration. And there's something about the idea that we have committed to a thing and we need to see it through to the end. And that's not full consent, actually. If we want to get down to the nitty-gritty of it, that's tolerating, and that's a completely different thing. So I encourage partners to think about themselves as being on a pleasure adventure, because it just changes the narrative, it lightens the tone, it brings something quite different in terms of the outcome and the focus. Because if it's very orgasm focused, then that's your measure of success. Now, what we haven't mentioned about is there are, if we assume women, if we're thinking about heterosexual couples, women over here having a menopausal experience, their male partners over here in heterosexual couples are having an altogether different experience that might involve erectile dysfunction and all sorts of other things. So you can sometimes have these things coming alongside each other. And if we don't talk about them, we're both in a couple who love each other, having really difficult experiences, and we're not sharing them with each other. And that can become really destructive over time.
Yeah, I think it's like you say, it's exploding open that idea of what sex is for couples, and that's going to benefit both, hopefully. And I mean, there's so much chat in the chat, Claire, just around people's own experiences and, you know, the difficulties and the concerning things. And, you know, I think that idea of pleasure exploring is maybe a really lovely way to frame it, because there's some questions, because I'm really conscious of time. We could speak about this for 17 years, but there's questions in the chat, in the Q&A box, around, you know, there's one person, for example, who, you know, the thought of, you know, pain, the thought of something that's maybe a concern happening, all these kind of concerns, that can actually inhibit sexual desire or the wish to have sex at all. That just fear of pain. Absolutely.
You know, our sexuality in the round involves our body and our mind and our spirit and all sorts of other things, depending on how you want to look at that. You know, your body can be easily so we talked about this accelerators and the brakes. So there are things that will push us towards desire, and there are things that will put things on the brakes. Things going through our mind around fear, what we've got to do tomorrow, the fact that we forgot to pick up such and such at the supermarket, all of those kind of things are things that put on the brakes. And you cannot move, if we think about it as a car, you know, the accelerator will make it go, but it's not going anywhere if the brakes are on. And so for a lot of people, the work that they're doing with me is about taking the brakes off before we even get to putting the accelerator on. So you might know the sorts of things that put on brakes for you. So context and the environment that we're having intimate experiences in can really matter. Smells really matter to me. For example, I really struggle if there are things that are a mess, you know, the contextual things. We know for people in female bodies that the context in which it's happening is as important often as what is happening to us. So in terms of the body, our bodily experiences and all those kind of things. So the context that you set up for yourself, you know, if you are thinking about, right, okay, I'm going to go home and do this, don't do it on a night where you've got kids to take to football or so-and-so to pick up from such and such. You know, you need to think about, am I prioritizing this, and can I take the other things out of the way that are going to press the brakes? And that could be all sorts of different things for you. And it sounds like for that person, a fear of pain, a fear of discomfort is going to be a massive something for the break. So you need to take some action ahead of time so that you know that's going to be a problem. It might be about lube, it might be about vaginal moisturizers, it might be just about telling your partner that that's what's going on. And, you know, many people with vaginas are having painful sex, whether they're menopausal or not, because usually they're not aroused enough. And that's another thing. It takes significantly longer for female genitalia to be at their maximum arousal, their maximum physical arousal, than it does for someone with a penis, for example. So the amount of time it takes us to get to the same level of arousal, and it takes time, and it takes attention, and it takes tender care, and it takes the type of touch that you like, or whatever it is that you need. Often one of the big things that I work with as couples is slow down. There's no hurry. Slow down. You know, there is literally no hurry. The slower you can be, the more intentional you can be, the more in connection you can stay with each other. Generally, that is what warms up a female body, all of those things. So the fear of pain piece, I think, needs to be looked at in different ways. Is there genuine dryness? Is there an actual hormonal problem that some intervention would help? But the next bit is, are you having sex that you want to be having? Do you like the things that are happening to you? And if not, you're the only person who can do something about that. Your partner is not a mind reader. If you're being touched in ways that are not arousing to you, then you need to do something about that in gentle ways, and the ways that you can talk to your partner about all of that. But if you are tolerating touch you don't like, your body isn't going to get on board because it's not pleasant, it's not pleasurable for you. And the third thing is around, can I take some action ahead of time? Is there something here that I can do that I know that will alleviate any of those worries? And that might be around having a conversation about lube. Lube changes everything. Whether you're menopausal or not, lube changes everything. So there's lots of different things there to think about.
I wonder if you could just speak briefly. There's a question in the chat around bladder problems.
Yep. So we touched on that. So yeah, I think a really important thing to understand is that incontinence and bladder issues are all part and parcel of exactly the same thing. So the thing that often people will talk about what we call latchkey incontinence, which is you're just pottling along, you don't really realize you need the toilet till you put your key in the door, and then all of a sudden you're absolutely desperate, you can't get to the toilet. Those kind of symptoms, stress incontinence, all different types of incontinence, can become worse at the perimenopause and menopause because all of the same tissues, the bladder, the urethra, that's the tube from the bladder to the outside, and the pelvic floor, all need estrogen to work. So if you are having incontinence issues, if you're having incontinence during sex, if you're experiencing that kind of latchkey feeling or just not being able to hold it, all of those things may be part and parcel of the genitourinary symptom of menopause, and they may well be treated with vaginal estrogens very successfully. So bladder things as well, even if you don't have dryness and pain, bladder issues on their own can also be successfully treated with vaginal estrogens, and they often go together. Even if you get the bladder things first, you might develop the vaginal symptoms later on, or vice versa. So they definitely go together.
Perfect. And just one more question, Claire. We've got somebody in the chat who has vaginal dryness, but also has issues with mucus. Now, is this linked to menopause? Yeah,
so sometimes, so there's different things. So what happens is when the estrogen we're losing the estrogen in the tissues change the way in which they work. So normally, as you know, our vaginas are self-cleaning things. They're creating mucus and things all the time. The texture and quantity and quality of that mucus can change as the estrogen changes. So some people might get a very watery discharge, for example. Some people might get quite a thick, sticky discharge. And the other thing is that the bacteria that grow in our vagina change with time. So it becomes much more like the bugs that grow in our anus and our rectum. So we have a particular, what we call the vaginal flora. So that's the type of bugs that grow. And the pH, so that's the acidity of vagina, changes after the menopause with all of these changes that we're talking about. And therefore, because the acidity changes, different bugs grow there. And that's also why we're more prone to getting urinary tract infections, because we've now got all the bugs that were in our anus and rectum are now just a bit closer because of the same bugs that are now growing in our vagina, which makes it easier for them to get to the urinary tract. So all of those things kind of come together. So yes, absolutely, you can get changes in vaginal discharge. It could be more watery, it could be thicker, all sorts of things can go along with that.
I'm sure that kind of clears some questions that a lot of people might be having. Well, Claire, thank you so much for all of that. I mean, there's so many questions still in the Q&A, but I wonder if maybe we can get some written answers and maybe send that to people afterwards, just some kind of themes that maybe haven't been covered, but we've covered so much, Claire, and I know that everybody, and looking at the chat, everybody's just so happy that we're having this conversation, something that many people, I imagine, feel like they can't have a conversation like this with their partners or with their friends or with anybody. So thank you very much. So I know that we've got our kind of embodiment piece. So I wonder if for the final section, if you just want to kick us off with that then, Claire.
Yeah, and just to speak to all the people that are commenting in the chat, it's all normal. I promise, it's all normal. That doesn't mean you need to put up with it. I don't mean that. Don't suffer it because it's normal. What I mean is you're not broken. It is really happening to you. There are things that you can do, and please take some action on the basis of what you've heard today, and go and ask for the things that you need. You know, people mentioning there, yeah, I've got small volumes of urine leakage. It smells different. All of that is actually true. It's really happening to you. And it doesn't have to be happening to you. If you wanted to take some action about it, it's available to you. And like a lot of these things, it's a little bit of trial and error till we get something that works for you, but there are things there that you can try. But what we thought we would do, Jen, is just do a little bit of this kind of a little embodiment piece just around what is it that you want? You know, having heard all of that, you've come to this webinar because presumably you want something different to what you already have. So the invitation was going to be, if it feels right, we can't see you, so nobody knows what you're doing on the webinar front, but actually, would you be willing for 5 minutes just to take some time to close your eyes, first of all? So the invitation is to close your eyes. I'm going to close mine as well. Is to close your eyes and just for a moment, feel the weight of your body supported on whatever it is that you're sitting on. Maybe you're in a desk chair, maybe you're sitting on the end of your bed, maybe you're sitting on the sofa. Can you take a moment to just feel the weight of your body supported? And maybe if it feels helpful and it feels right for you, bring the focus of your attention and your mind's eye to the parts of your body that are in contact with whatever you're sitting on. So maybe your sit bones, your bum, the back of your thighs. And if you bring the focus of your attention there, can you let those places soften just a little, just 1%? Can you let them soften? Can you ease into the support that's coming up towards you from the chair? And the invitation, if it feels comfortable for you, is to bring the focus of your attention to your breathing. No need to do anything or change anything about it right now. Just noticing that your body is being breathed, whether you do anything or not. Maybe just noticing the rise and fall of your chest. And the invitation as you notice your breathing is, what happens if you just breathe out for a beat or a second more than you normally would? If you were just going to exhale for a little bit longer than you normally would. Just notice what happens in your body. And noticing as you breathe out just that little bit longer, if it helps you to sink into the support of whatever it is that you're sitting on just a little bit more. Nothing to force or do. What if you were just going to be 1% more relaxed than you are right now? And noticing what happens in your body as you breathe out just that little bit longer. Maybe your inhale becomes a little bit deeper. So maybe your in-breath becomes a little bit deeper. Maybe it supports you to drop your shoulders just a little bit. And the invitation is just to use this slightly deeper breath to help you to relax. And from this place of feeling supported from below, with your breathing relaxed, and your body even just 1% more relaxed than it was before. If you were going to trust the wisdom of your body to tell you the truth, thinking about your sex life, your sexual expression, your pleasure, your feelings in your body, what do you want? And noticing what bubbles up. Try not to judge it or change it. If you were to ask, and you were to start a sentence with, I want, what would it say? You might have lots of I wants, that's great. I want. I want. I want. Maybe just noticing your own reactions to the things that come up. What if you were to trust that they were true? Noticing if it's really hard, if it's really hard to know what you want, even when you're given the opportunity, and that's okay. That's where we are, that's okay. Even just noticing that it's difficult to know what you want is a step in the right direction to figuring out what it is that you want. And staying with your slightly slower pace of breathing in this place of relaxation. I want. I want. I want. I want. And just noticing if you're surprised about some of the things that have come up. Notice if you're frustrated or upset or this isn't landing for you. That's okay too. It's all welcome. There's no need to force yourself to do anything. And when we come back to the screen in a moment or two, the invitation is going to be, when you get off this webinar, write it down somewhere. Write it down. Trust that the things that have come up for you are true. Write it down. And then think about how you might get some of those things that you want. And the invitation to bring this piece to a close is going to be that we're going to take 3 breaths together to bring us into virtual community with each other wherever we are. So the invitation is going to be to inhale and exhale. And inhale and exhale. And inhale and exhale. Just bringing your breathing back to whatever normal breathing is for you. Taking a moment, maybe wiggling your fingers and toes. Coming back to the screen when you're ready, there's no rush. Coming back to the screen. And just noticing how you feel. How do you feel? Maybe something came up for you really clearly. Maybe you're surprised at what came up. Maybe nothing came up when you feel frustrated. All of that's okay. All of that's okay. But if you don't know what you want, it's going to be very difficult for you to know how you're going to get it. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you very much for that, Claire. That was very relaxing, and I'm sure everybody felt the same. we're at the end of our session. I know that we could have spoken for so much longer, and I know that so many people have so much more to ask and lots of things to share. But thank you so much, Claire. It's been a really great session. I mean, if you can see from the chat, there's so many comments. Everybody's just really happy to be having this conversation and for things to just be normalised, and to know that, you know, like they say, it's all normal and they're not alone in this. So thank you very much.
And they're very welcome to come and join us over the Pleasure Possibility. So the Pleasure Possibility, it's a closed group on Facebook. It's full, it's only got people of a certain age talking about this topic in particular, supporting each other, celebrating their wins, getting advice. So you're very welcome to come and join us there to continue the conversation.
Absolutely, and we'll put some links in the chat just before we close off with just some further resources, including Claire, the website of the Pleasure Possibility. But I'd just like to really thank everybody for coming along today and joining us. I know it's probably some people's lunchtime, so thank you very much for making the time. And thanks to Claire for the graphic, which is looking great already. Once that's finished, we'll share it with everybody who has registered so they can see the final version. Thanks to Leslie and Louise for interpreting for us today, and for Felicity and Shoba, who you can't see on screen, but are members of the Scottish Government's Women's Health Plan team, and they've helped a lot in the organising of today. But as I say, there's lots of further resources. There's the NHS Informs Women's Health Platform. There's Claire's work and Claire's kind of coaching programmes over at the Pleasure Possibility. There's also menopause cafes if you're looking for a space to chat with other people, and they happen all around the country. And then finally, at the Alliance, we also have lots of work going on around women's health, and including menopause. So sign up to our mailing list and we'll pop the email in the chat. But if I can just extend a thank you again to everybody, and really hope to see you again at another one of our conversations. So thank you and have a good day.